Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's Talking Tech session. Thank you for coming. EstesGroup's Talking Tech session is an opportunity for us to sit down with some of the colleagues in the ERP and IT spaces and discuss some of the technical topics that are relevant in our industry. My guest today is Jason Palmer, Chief Technology Officer at Unified AR. Now, for those of you who may not be aware of Unified AR, Unified is a provider of cloud-based accounts receivable and payment acceptance solutions in support of the distribution and wholesale industries. And with his own broad background in supply chain, analytics, and information technology, Jason has helped lead Unified through the design and development of their AR platform. So today, I want to sit down with Jason, discuss the myriad of considerations that a solution provider like Unified encounters when defining, designing, constructing, deploying, and even maintaining a solution such as Unified AR. And with that, Jason, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So with that, Jason, let's start by talking methodology. So every solution provider I work with, when I talk with them, it seems we come up with a methodology that they use to govern the work they do, whether it's waterfall or RAD or Agile or Scrum. What development methodology does Unified employ?
So, um, I love Agile. I love Scrum. We don't have really the team in place to do full Scrum. So what we do more of a Kanban. Um, but I think for different organizations, I think a true Scrum is really a great way to go. But it requires that you have the rest of the support staff to do that successfully. And we don't have that. But Kanban works really good for us. We have, work in process limits. Um, I love iteration. You can do that with any agile methodology. Um, I love getting something out there and showing it to a stakeholder, whether that be someone internal or a customer or a prospect, getting feedback, acting on it, showing them something else. That process I think works really well. In the beginning of my career, we used waterfall most of the time, and there's a lot of I think there's a good reason that it's not really used that much anymore. It's very difficult to get all of those requirements up front and to get them correct, and then you start to build some animosity between the business when they change one, and they're like, "Well, I just worked on this for 6 months." So I really do love the quick feedback loops, and the Kanban has been working really really well for us for the team that we have, for the size of the team that we have. Um, it works very well.
Kanban, if I understand that correctly, then is you have a certain element of functionality that you have queued up in front of the developers as their next thing to do after they complete their prior task?
Yeah. So basically, the way that we do it is we have a board, which I'm sure everybody is used to seeing, and we'll have new ideas go into the first swim lane, and really that's what we call backlog not ready. So, anything we think of or a customer gives us, we don't want to lose the idea. We put it in there. We might write a little description in there, but it's not ready for somebody to work on. We will take those during a weekly planning session, and we'll take those. And the planning session involves some of the technical team and then some of the business team. And we'll go through those new ideas in there. We'll decide if any of them are worth working on right now. We're getting ready to work on right now, and then we call it hydrating the story. So we will then put things into that user story that the developer will need to work on it. Then we move it over into the backlog, and then part of that grooming process that we do every week is we arrange that backlog in the priority order. So we'll put whatever's most important at the top, and then from there, and those two lanes have no limit on how many cards can be in them. The next limit is actually working. So when a developer gets done, um, they will take the thing off the top of the list, assuming they can work on it. If it's something they're not familiar with, or they'll take the first thing on the list that they can work on. They move it over into their working lane, and there's a work in process limit. So you can't be working on 100 things. There's a limit on how many things you can work on, and you got to finish it. And if it gets blocked, we move it over into a blocked lane so that we all know that's blocked, and other people can help get unblocked. Then it'll move over into a work completed, and that signifies that it needs testing. That's user acceptance testing. So the user will then, whoever requested it, will approve it or suggest changes, and it'll come back to the backlog ready and work its way through again.
Nice, nice. I imagine when you're working with agile and more modularized solution development, does that drive how you construct solutions? If you have a more modularized notion of, we know we're not going to be able to nail every solution or every requirement right at the beginning. Do you find yourself building solutions so that they're a little more interoperable as those requirements change over time?
Yeah, and really what we'll see is, if we think something's going to take an inordinate amount of time, we'll start to break it down into smaller tasks. And if something comes up and let's say it goes over user acceptance and the user comes back and says, this is what I wanted, but I also think we could do this or we could change it this way. If that's a 5-minute change, we do it and it gets out. If it's a more involved change, we spawn off another task and we push that to production. We do have a philosophy that we do not want code waiting to go to production. So we love feature flags. We like getting code to production because the faster it gets to production, the more fresh it is in our heads. So if there is a problem or if we go to A, fresh in our heads, we can solve that problem. But we don't like things to wait for a long time. So if it's a bigger feature, we try to roll parts of it out into production, even if that code never gets done. We just want the code to get to production. So we do deployments very frequently and try to get code. Obviously, everything that goes to production is tested, maybe hit, because we just want it to keep going. But I find it very difficult if you have something you did 6 months ago go into production today. It's very, very difficult to debug that and try to even remember if there is an issue. Oh, it's probably because of this. If it's all fresh in your head, it's a lot easier.
Mhm. No, that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about Unified as a first pass, that first version of Unified that came out. I'm assuming then Unified was kind of built up to that point, kind of from those initial ideas to that set of business requirements to a technical architecture and beyond. At what point did you decide that this was the functionality that was going to be our alpha, our first version that we rolled out to the customer?
So the idea, our founder, Dan Hatcher, he's and a lot of our team, most of our company has been in the payments industry for years and years and years. So Dan has been working with companies with specifically P21, and knew that these problems existed and knew that there had to be a way to solve it. So he had it in his head. That's where the idea came from. And then, we get to, okay, well, what is it? Let's define the problem so that we can understand it. That's when I met Dan and John, and we started to go through that and figure out, yeah, we can solve this problem. Um, you know, One of the things that I like to say for people in any IT um, is we're problem solvers. Everybody in IT, that's why we went into IT. At least for me personally, like it was, you see these people with problems, and you're like, well, that takes you 3 hours. I could help you. I could write something that could do that in 5 minutes for you. So at the end of the day, um, all we are is problem solvers, and that's how we approach everything. That's how I approach everything. Um, so we went and in terms of those business requirements, we went out to some businesses that run P21 and sat with them and started to understand the problem, the workflow. Then we went to some P21 consultants and experts, and started to get some ideas and then run things by them on, would this work? They were extremely, extremely helpful. Um, and then also there's internal people on our side from a payment standpoint that have, you know, years and years, decades of experience in payments, and so we leverage that too, and that kind of set out our business requirements. I like to define the problem quite well. I don't like to start on something until I understand the problem, and that's half the fun to me, is understanding business process and flow, and I think that's critically important. So we spend a lot of time on that, um, and then from there we go and we design the technical architecture. And for us, at the time when I joined Unified, um, there was no infrastructure. So there was not one program, not one server, not any, nothing existed. So that makes it a pretty easy decision to go cloud native. You know, you don't really want to put uh, an entire infrastructure together in a startup. So the cloud is just wonderful for that. Um, so that's we decided we were going to be cloud native. Then we had to pick, you know, where. Um, we picked Azure. I like Azure. It's a little more expensive, I think, than maybe some of the others, but it's familiar, and I think that that helps. So we're willing to pay a little extra for that, and they do. I'm very impressed with what I've seen over there. Um, and then we start to think about, you know, the architecture. So we're a cloud-based solution, but we integrate with um, on-premise ERP systems. So there has to be an on-premise, a non-cloud application. So we started to think about how to break that down. You know, we kind of just looked at it as, you know, a couple things. So we wanted we did not want the customers to have to open firewall ports or change anything like that. So really that meant, okay, we're going to need to install something inside that can then talk to us from the outside instead of poking in. You know, prior to Unified, my entire career, I've not been on the technology provider side. I've been through distribution and logistics, like you said. So, you know, um, when uh, when I was approaching this, I was saying, okay, well, I want this to be something that that I would not have a problem with, or that, you know, one of my administrators would not have a problem installing. So that meant no admin rights, no poking holes in firewalls, no writing directly to the database. So, I mean, these are best practices, but when you're sitting in the CIO role, it's amazing how many vendors, you know, come in and say, well, we need admin rights on your system, and that was out of the question for us. So that went a lot. That kind of thinking went into the architecture. Um, and then, you know, what were our other goals? Were to reduce PCI scope for our customers. So that was always in our head. And then really to try to make it ERP agnostic. So we did design it initially with P21 as our first ERP implementation, but from the beginning we said, okay, well, the core of this system, which is like the API part, the part in the cloud, is going to be ERP agnostic. And then the what we call the integration part is going to be tightly coupled to the ERP. So that portion is tightly coupled, like in the P21 instance, is tightly coupled to P21. Um, Everything about it, the manner in which it accesses data, the schema that it accesses, all of those things are very tightly coupled, and then it handles transforming that into an agnostic model that gets sent out to the API. Um, and then, you know, one of the things that I thought was really cool that we did was, since we had to install something, um, things change a lot, and especially in the beginning, when we knew that, you know, at a high level we need this data and this data, but we knew that there was going to be people saying, well, I'd like to have this field or that field or this field, or change the business logic a little bit. And we did not want to be going back to customers and saying, hey, here's a new version of the software, can you please install this? Because I thought that that would happen probably monthly. To be honest, um, changes like that happen almost weekly. So I'm glad that what we did is we came up with a way that without requiring admin access or access to their system or anything like that, we can actually encapsulate that business logic on our side and have what's installed on the customer's side, the merchant side, reach out to our side um, and and get that business logic so that I can update it every day, and we're not asking the customers to reinstall things because um, that would get old pretty quickly. I think if somebody was asking you to run an install program every day.
No, I imagine it could. Indeed. So, kind of on that note, what does some of the decisions look like when you're trying to decide, what programming language you're going to use to construct your solution, what kind of data storage medium you're going to use? Like you talked a little bit about the API or the integration strategy. How do those conversations flow?
Yeah, that's a good question. I, in general, we were using what we were comfortable with if it worked. Um, so I'm very experienced with the Microsoft stack. So unless there was a reason not to use that, we we're a .NET shop. Since we picked Azure, that fits very well. And I subscribe to the KISS principle. So if there's no reason to make it more complicated, we're not going to do that. There has to be a reason.
And so let's talk for a bit about solution construction and the team that you used to
Yeah.
build it. Was Unified built from your own team, the same folks who would go on to maintain it, or did you pull in an auxiliary group of people to assist? How did that roll?
So that's changed a little bit over time. So when we first started this, um, we had some outsourced development, but onshore, local in Nashville, um, that were helping in the beginning, and then we went on to start hiring. So Wha the way I think about it and what the philosophy that I like to take on that is I would like the core functionality and the things that differentiate us to be in-house to keep that knowledge, that institutional knowledge in-house, but we also need to leverage outside resources. So um, we will pick and choose things, and then we'll work with outside resources. Um, I'm not a huge fan of having them do an entire feature and then not review it with us or us have no knowledge of how to support it. That we won't engage in that, but we will take things. And right now we've just started another thing where we've outsourced, but they're really members of our team that are going to be writing um, some things for us that are really internal use, and we will use that. And then we'll also use services. So like you know something that we're not specializing in. Let's take email for instance. Like we email hundreds of thousands of documents, and when you first think about it, it's like, well, email's not that hard. You could email it yourself, but we don't. We use a service. And what that does is now I don't need to be an email expert because the benefit of Unified is not that we're able to email something. The benefit is that we integrate, we pull it out, we email it, we give you the analytics on it. But there are companies who specialize in that. So like AscendGrid, or we use a company called Postmark, and they're fantastic. So they handle getting that delivered. So now I don't need to be an expert, but I can also go to a customer and say, look, I have a better chance of getting this delivered because we're using a company that's all they do, and they have a good reputation in terms of the email world, so they're likely to get through away from a spam box, and that's worth paying for. Same thing with authorization, right? So I don't want to be in the business of when you log into our system, keeping that password and authorizing you, and then I have to implement two-factor, and I have, there are services out there that you can integrate with, and that's not a core part of our business. Like logging into our system is not the core part. It's what you get after you log in.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I like the way you defined it in terms of things that are core to your business versus things that are tertiary, and therefore the things that you would opt to look for a third-party service to provide for you. I think that makes a lot of sense. And to our audience, I wanted to thank them for their engagement here, and also wanted to note that Uni Bryant, we had a great interview about a month ago. You should really check it out on our YouTube page, shameless plug. That she helped also note that Rubber Tree is going to be at that meeting in the Carolinas. It's like a family reunion. Pretty much everybody in the P21 community is hunkering down to that same location, and I expect it to be an absolute debacle. We're going to have some fun. I'm sure tables will be turned, and I'm probably going to leave with a black eye, which is probably the way it should be. But with that, let's move on to the subject of testing. When I hear about construction of a solution, I imagine that act of verifying functionality to be, a combination of internal unit testing and some functional testing by your beta customers. Now, how do you go through that process of vetting out your solution? Was it different when you first constructed it versus now? How did that evolve over time?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's what a lot of people think is not the fun part. Um, but it's critical. And I think if you break it into two pieces, it's, what you said at the end about, while we're developing it, we're relying on um, people that are experts in the industry, our customers, and working out workflow. Like, does this work? Does this make sense? From the accounting perspective, is this okay to do? Is it the best way to do it? Is there a better way to do it? Especially, specific in P21. Is this an accepted way? Will our customers accept this? And is it the best way to do it? So working all that out with customers and consultants is critical, and they're invaluable in that. Um, and then we build it. And one of the really nice things about P21 is that everybody has a test environment. Um, I haven't seen that in the broader world with all ERPs. It's a best practice for sure, but not everybody does. And everybody we've run across has what they call a play environment, P21, or a test environment. And that's wonderful because we can then hook up to that while we're developing something, or after we've developed, whether it's a proof of concept or a full product, and show it to our customers and let them use it and tell us, this needs to be changed, or I'd like it to look this way, or do this, or so that's how we develop it and test it during that, and then we let customers and consultants use it and make sure that it's working the way that we stated it should be working. After it's done being developed and it's released and it's a production product, we need to make sure we don't break it. And obviously, the bigger and more complex our solution gets, the more likely it is that we're going to break something in the legacy system as we build things. So we actually, and this is where it really is not fun, because you can't regression test a solution that's growing as big as ours manually every time. And with my my previous comment on I'd like to deploy a lot, you can't deploy frequently and manually regression test the whole thing. It won't work. So what we've been doing for a while now is we partnered with a company, and they're phenomenal, and they do basically interface testing. So they'll actually bring our product up in a browser, automated, and test everything. And they write these tests, and it's phenomenal. There's a gentleman, his name's Ed Kitt. He is with a company called STT, and they really have changed the way that we do our QA. So they're writing these tests with us. We work with them on a regular basis. It's not like we outsource it and don't talk to them. They're helping us in a consultative manner on proper test methodology and the structure of tests. We know what we should be testing from a business side and what the product's supposed to be, but they'll offer other things on, you should also test this and this. So that's worked out really well for us. And what it does, and whether you do it in house or you have somebody else help you, I think it's really important. Automated testing is very important. Um, we also combine that with unit testing, automated unit testing. So that'll happen first, prior to code even being merged. The unit tests will have to pass, and then we'll release it to QA, and they'll do the automated interface testing. But what it allows us to do is full regression for every single release, before it goes to production, and we can put it into the DevOps pipeline. So, that's the other thing we haven't really talked about, but full continuous integration, and we're not continuous deployment, but we're fully automated deployment. So there are gates, and a human will have to will have to not push it, but approve it to go to production. Um, but it's all automated, and I think I don't know how long ago, probably almost 10 years ago, I was reading about that and reading, I can't remember the book, but it's a great book about basically agile and continuous integration and continuous deployment, and thinking, wow, that would be wonderful to get there, but not ever seeing a way like from where I was to going there. And even thinking it was really cool, I still underestimated how important it is. I don't. It's one of those things where you can't imagine not doing that. Um, we put so much effort in previous lives into the actual deployment. We had people up till midnight. It was a big effort to get things deployed, and now it's. I mean, we deployed a dev that is continuous deployment, and that happens multiple times a day, um, and it's effortless. So that's really important.
Wow, that must be really nice to take that whole piece, because yes, I remember with code deployments always being kind of a nightmare to be able to take that whole chunk and suddenly say this chunk of your daily life is now tertiary, and we can offload it here to this set of techniques and policies and solutions, and allow you to just kind of focus your brains on, because it's amazing how much developer brain power gets sucked up by things like that. So that's really
Yeah.
exciting to see that moving into a new world. So that said, let's look about the maintenance of the unified solution, and kind of in terms of identifying new requirements from the user community, requirements that might be the sort of next level. Now that you've provided this base level of capability that opens people's eyes to, oh boy, now that I have this, it would be great for it to do that. How do you go about that process of finding new requirements and trying to flush them out into the next versions of your software?
Um, that is a good question. I mean, the short answer is our customers. Um, we do have uh, ideas for products that and features, I should say, that we come up with ourselves, but 80% is customers and prospects. So we honestly have implemented things that we may be on a demo call and get feedback. The team doing that gets feedback on hey, we do something this way, and it would really make sense if your product did this. And even if that prospect doesn't decide to go with us, we don't wait for them to decide to become a customer. If it's a good idea, we'll just do it. Um, and if it's something that we can see that is likely to be needed by other customers of ours, so we are constantly improving. Really, like I said, 80% of it is coming from customers, whether it's during an implementation or existing customers who come to us and ask for X, Y, and Z. And I'll tell you, we developed the product, and we had a great product, and then we started implementing customer after customer after customer, and we're a very customer centered company, so we are every single implementation learning new things that are needed and or that could be improved. So we're really taking all of that feedback and starting to implement it into the product going forward. So that's where most of those features and enhancements come from.
Nice. I think that's a great idea. The idea of moving on an idea, not necessarily of this is why I bought your solution, but this is why I didn't buy it. It seems like there's kind of a natural bit of gap closure that comes from that kind of interaction, trying to understand, why didn't we hit the mark here, and is that something that is that you can block up or mend with future versions. That seems like an exciting way of trying to take those things and turn them into success.
Yeah.
And I thought one thing I think that's really interesting when I talk to members of the community now, Estes, we find ourselves kind of as the middleman quite often, because if we're standing up and hosting an ERP system, we are kind of in the middle where folks like yourself, like Recurrency, like Rubber Tree or DC Cap are connecting to the ecosystem that we're hosting. And when in doing so, we kind of learn a little bit about each of these groups and what kind of functionality they do. And when I think about that, I tend to break up the things that solution providers like yourself do and into kind of two categories, one being automation and one is more what I would call differentiating functionality. So by automation, I'm normally thinking of the capabilities that are native to the ERP, but they're transacted manually. They can be slow, cumbersome, labor intensive, and by automating them, the solution provider is providing a clear value added benefit of taking a 5-minute step and reducing it to a click of a button. And by differentiating functionality, I'm thinking about capabilities that aren't in the native ERP system. There's something that should be there and isn't or can't be there for whatever reason. And this solution provider is now providing this auxiliary wrapper functionality that helps bridge gaps and make companies maybe not more efficient, but more effective. So within that context, tell me a little bit about Unified's blend of automation and differentiating functionality. What do you think that blend is, and how do you kind of best fine tune that to serve your clients?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think we kind of blend the two of them. So you talk about automation and then what differentiates us. Um, what is something that the ERP can't do that we can. And if you take something like kind of the core of for our terms based stuff, is emailing invoices, right? So P21 can do that, but it can't do it to the level that we do. So we're taking something and automating it and then value adding it as well. So, instead of you having to go into P21, click a button, wait for it to produce all these PDFs and then email them out, we're doing that automatically for you. You don't have you don't have to go in and click anything, but then we're also adding analytics on the emails. So, were they opened, were they delivered, were they clicked? Um, we're adding a whole host of features in terms of, do you want a PDF? Do you want it to be a link? Um, how often do you want them to go? And do you want, these kind of invoices to go every minute and then these go once a day so we're adding all of these features that are both automating and improving and value adding. Same thing with statements, right? So, you can run statements in P21, but we can run them automatically. We can, put links to the invoices in there. We can really automate it and then step it up a level. And that all comes from, listening to our customers, like we were talking about before. Um, so and then there are a couple things that we're doing that are, I think, huge game changers. There's some features we're releasing that we're not ready to release yet, so I stay tuned. But I think from the feedback we get from our customers, um, we're implementing all the things in our realm, in the AR realm, that are really saving time and solving problems. We don't. Our goal is for a customer to automate away all of the regular mundane stuff. So sending invoices, getting a call and a payment, applying cash, all of that stuff, we want to automate it completely away and then take those people and use them for analysis, true collections. So like we're not a collections company. We don't make phone calls and collect money. Your team can now and we like to assist in that is we can give you information and analytics and reports and to assist them in doing things that are not mundane, like the AR analysis, collections, determining who to call, all of those things. So that's what we like to see is get out of the day-to-day tasks and then take those people and use them for things that are a little more important.
Nice. It's interesting because it's you're talking about the AR technicians day in a life, and it mirrors what you talked about earlier. This idea of taking all the things that are tertiary and finding a way to make those as the mundane. We'd say automate the mundane, make that stuff as automated and as straightforward as possible, and then free up that time now to do more analytic, value-added work. It's interesting that what you guys are trying to accomplish internally is also the solution and kind of the value added that you're applying to your own your own customer base. I
That's a
imagine
great point. I didn't think of it that way, but you're 100% right.
Intriguing. No, that's a lot of fun to see. I imagine that value when you're talking to your customers to see did we hit the mark? Did we make that work for you? It's coming from that kind of feedback that yes, now I have an extra X number of hours a week to chase down the troublesome invoices and let all the easy stuff just kind of flow its way through. I also love that idea of differentiating functionality and automation, not necessarily being two split categories, but actually just automating and then adding value. That to me is something that I hadn't thought about before. So that's a really exciting way of kind of taking that ball and running with it. Now, let's talk a little bit about the challenges with integration. And you talked early on here. I want to dig a little bit more just because Profit 21 is an interesting solution around which to be building a solution platform because it is originally an on-premise ERP that has since partially migrated to the cloud. So there's a lot of customers that are what we sometimes call public cloud or SaaS based. There's also some who are in the middle, kind of in a co-location or a private cloud situation, and there's still an on-premise footprint. You layer that on top of the fact that P21 as an architecture is in evolution. They've evolved beyond their two-tier desktop client to the database model to more of a traditional three-tier N-tier with an application server, web server layer in the middle, kind of thinning out the client and letting the database strictly handle, storing data and not providing business logic. Now, when you encountered P21 in all those complexities, did that affect the construction of the unified platform or the approaches you used in constructing integrations?
Yeah, that's a great question and really good points on P21. So I'll tell you, kind of funny, when we started designing our solution, we were designing for the on-premise. I didn't know that the SaaS existed, to be quite honest. And we had a very good customer of ours who was on-premise, had an issue on-premise, and decided to go SaaS. And called us and said, we're switching to SaaS in, I forget how long, but it wasn't very long, especially in a development. It may have been in a month from now. It was a very short time period for development. And they said, it's critical that you guys, that we retain you. And I was like, oh no, I didn't know they had a SaaS. How do we integrate with SaaS? So, and we had made a decision, in talking with customers and consultants from the very beginning to stay away from the API where we didn't have to. If we could read, I'm not a big promoter of writing to the database, but if I could read from it, that's what we were doing to stay away from the API because we wanted our solution to be available to people who had not paid for the API. So we didn't have that API option. But we were able to come up with a solution pretty quick. I think whenever you come across something like that, and it's like the initial reaction is, "Oh my gosh, there's no way you can do this," and that normally, that is my reaction, and then you need to sit back and you know um, and just think about it, and that's one of the things that I love is thinking about creative ways to solve problems, and let's what I said from the very beginning, like that's what we do is we're problem solvers. We just happen to use technology, but we solve problems. So um, that's what we did is we sat down, thought about it, and you eat the whale one bite at a time is what like so you just start doing it. And what we were able to do is, one of the things that was important to me is not having, like, so we don't do this for customers, and we didn't want to do it for hosting environments either, is have different sets of code. So I don't if a customer wants a change, we will do it. Well, we do pretty much anything that our customers ask, but it all goes into our environment, into our one code base, and gets feature flagged. So you may be the only one that uses that, but it's in the code for everything. And it's the same thing for when you start talking about SaaS versus on premise. We didn't want different logic running to load invoices, because the way that we architected it was the integration piece, the piece that touches P21, is tightly coupled and has a ton of business logic in it that converts things to a more agnostic format for our central system, our core API, which is ERP agnostic. So I didn't want to maintain two versions of that code, and when you start thinking about moving forward, um, and making changes, which we make a ton of changes, doing everything twice. That just that I couldn't accept that. So we came up with a way to basically make components, and so all of the business logic and all of that is once in one library, and that library is then loaded by each different thing that needs it. Um, and the private hosting, it was the same thing. I didn't know it existed. We had a whole bunch of customers, and then we got one, and they said that they're hosted, so we thought it was SaaS, public cloud, and they're sending tickets into Epicor for what we normally do on the public cloud, and Epicor is totally confused as to what they're asking for because they're not on public cloud, and they're asking for all these public cloud things. And we learned then that there was the third method of hosting, which is, I guess they call the private cloud. Um, and we had to come up with a solution for that as well, because they all are a little bit different. The nice thing is the system behind it's all the same, but how you're allowed to interact with it, obviously is different. So we support all three now, but with kind of funny because when we started, we only knew that there was one. So I'm still waiting for that fourth one to pop up now.
Right, right. Cyber cloud, yes, direct to brain. I pity the developer who has to develop an API for this noggin. But I like that. That's an intriguing idea of how sometimes your development is wherever the customer drags you, kicking and screaming, is sometimes where the product needs to go. I love that idea. One basic question here. You talk about PCI scope, and that seems to be a critical thing in your business is PCI compliance. Are there specific technical challenges to that, or is that more of a business processing? What's the biggest challenge with wrapping up PCI compliance inside of a solution like yours?
So the easiest way to be PCI compliant is to not have to be PCI compliant. And what I mean by that is scope out. This is when, prior to this, I was CIO for a very large distributor, and that was our goal there as well, is make the systems that have to be PCI compliant, scope that down, make that the smallest possible number of systems and the smallest possible container, so that you only need to apply all this extra security to a smaller container. So that is the method that we follow. um, we try to, or we do, we try and we succeed in scoping out the majority of our systems. So that does involve, having different components, but you can do it in a way where, using iframes and, from a web standpoint, that it looks the same, but we'll have one page and only part of it would actually be in scope. Um, so and it's the same thing. We follow that internally. Scope out is should be the name of the game, and then you have to apply. And if you are in scope, the systems that are in scope, um, it's very complicated. It's very expensive. Um, it's not. I'm not saying it's unnecessary at all. It is. It's entirely necessary, but it's a very difficult um, thing for most organizations that are not large. Um, and a small organization with 2 or 3 people in IT, realistically, it's probably practically you probably really can't do it. So you really want to scope the whole thing out, and it's what we follow internally. But then it's also the advice that we give to our customers is, um, we can give you a solution that will scope you out entirely. Now you have to agree that you're going to use the solution, and you're not going to have people call you and give you credit card numbers over the phone and then key them in on a computer, because we can't scope you out if you're doing that. Your phone system's in scope, your computer's in scope, and there's nothing we can do about that. And I think there's also some broader misconceptions about PCI, where people think that they don't store credit card numbers, so they're compliant. They use a service that tokenizes, and that means you're compliant. And that means that doesn't mean you're compliant. And PCI applies to storing, processing, or transmitting. And I think people normally forget about processing and transmitting, because if you think you're on the phone and you key it in to a computer, but into a website that is compliant and tokenizes it for you, and it never gets stored, but it did transmit both your phone system and your computer, and you need to think about those things. And um, I think the smartest thing to do is to really scope it out, and whether that's passing that scope over to us or to somebody else or another, but that's the easiest way to do it, and it's the smartest way to do it. And kind of the point that you brought up before, like, I outsource email, outsourcing what we're specializing in to us, um, I think makes a lot of sense. And that, I know, I'm a little biased because I'm here, but I think it really does truly make a lot of sense.
No, that's awesome. That is. So then as we wrap up today and we start to near the end of the hour, got more of a personal question for you, Jason. You covered this a little bit, but I'd like to know a little bit more. What would you say, in terms of your role and the things you're doing, what would you find to be the most exciting aspect of this whole act of developing and maintaining new software? What do you find especially captivating about what you do?
Um, Honestly, it is problem solving. I love understanding different things, and we need to understand business process in what we're doing. So, sitting down with the business, and I've been doing this for decades, is sitting down with people, understanding how to do. I find it fascinating. Um, if even in my personal life, if I have a plumber come to the house, I'm fascinated to watch somebody who knows their craft well and does it. I find that interesting, and even if I'm not going to use the knowledge, I like learning it. And it's the same thing here. I like talking to people who are experts in AR. These are our customers who run these AR departments. Um, they're experts at what they do, and they know what help they need, and we get to learn that, and then we get to implement it and help them, and that's a very satisfying um, feeling to do that. Um, And then there's also, and specifically with this, and specifically with P21, you need to, there's no like there's not a document I can pick up and it says this is how you integrate this with P21. Some systems there are, but P21 doesn't really have that, and it's figuring out creative ways to do things that can scale, that'll work, that are don't violate a license or something, or legal. But figuring those out, it it in the beginning when you haven't figured it out, it's quite frustrating. But as you figure it out, it's quite rewarding. And I just um, so one of my friends in the industry, described me once as the honey badger. So like I'll just keep going after the problem. I'm not going to stop. And I think, and because I can't sleep, right, I'm always thinking about it. So we just that that's just very rewarding to me, and I find it fascinating. So figuring out how to do things, and learning from people what their business processes are so that we can help them. Everything, not just Unified, everything that I've done, and I don't think I'm alone in that. I think a lot of people that have gone into technology, that's the way they think. They like to help people and they like to solve problems.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I think that I hear that a lot. IT people are pleasers. We like to help people. Like that final goal of one, making the technical thing work, and knowing that what you did had a good result on the people who are benefiting from it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so as we wrap up this hour, Jason, really want to thank you for a great conversation. Really appreciate your time going digging into some of these things.
Yeah, no, Brad, I appreciate it. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.